Welcome to the local campaign, and thank you for joining us for our debate in the riding of Carleton. In just a moment, we'll meet the candidates who are here for the debate, but first, I'll go over how it's going to work. We're going to start with some opening statements of 1 minute in length from each of the candidates, and the order for those opening statements was drawn at random just before we began our telecast. Then we'll move to a series of debates about the important issues in Carleton and across the country in this federal election campaign. In each case, I'll start the discussion by directing a question to one of the candidates. That candidate will have 45 seconds to respond to the question, and then we'll open it up to debate from all of the candidates on that subject. When we wrap up that debate, I'll go back to the candidate to whom I directed the question originally, and that person will have 30 seconds to wrap up on that topic. We'll move through a number of different topics that way, and then we'll wrap up with closing statements, again, 1 minute in length for each of the candidates to make a final appeal to you, the voters, and we'll do those in the reverse order of the opening statements. So let's introduce the candidates who are here for our debate in Carleton. First is the Conservative candidate, Pierre Poilievre. Representing the Liberal Party of Canada is Gustave. From the People's Party of Canada, Peter Crawley. And from the New Democratic Party, Kevin Hua. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for the debate. And let's begin with the opening statement from Pierre Poilievre. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
Look at those prices. Inflation is at a 2-decade high. And there's really no excuse for the prices we're paying. We have more land, labor, and lumber than almost anyone in the world, and yet our housing prices are among the world's most expensive. We have the third biggest supply of oil on planet Earth, and yet we're paying $1.30 a liter for gas. We have the third most hectares per capita of farmland, and yet many families can't afford a nutritious basket of groceries, and prices are up $800 a family just to feed people. The problem is we're spending more and making less. Sure, we had to spend in the pandemic, but we didn't have to have the biggest deficit of all the G20 countries or get on track for 50 more years of deficits. We need to unleash our free enterprise economy to make more, cost less, restore paychecks, not debt. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up is Gustave, the Liberal Party candidate. Go ahead.
Thank you. I believe I can make a difference. Our riding deserves a stronger, more collaborative voice in Parliament. I'm not a career politician. I've spent the last 25 years in the private sector, have experience in financial services and the health sciences industry. I'm here to tell you that the Liberal plan will make us, or help us move forward by creating jobs, growing the middle class, and building a fair, greener, and more resilient future. My priority for Carleton is to collaborate with my provincial and municipal counterparts, attract investment for green infrastructure, improve access to health care, expand childcare, and support those still affected by the pandemic. While the Conservatives want to save money by cutting services, I neglect systemic barriers that many of us continue to face, our plan will invest in our future to build a better, greener, and healthier Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, representing the People's Party of Canada, Peter Crawley. Go right ahead.
Hello, everyone. Over the last 18 months, we have witnessed the greatest attack on our rights and freedoms in our lifetime. I'm standing here today as the only candidate in Carleton that will fight for your freedoms and stop this government tyranny. The PPC is the only party that opposes the COVID passport, mandatory vaccination, and lockdowns. All the other parties, including the Conservatives, have made it quite clear that they support the provinces in committing these violations against our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I am just a humble small business owner that felt compelled to take on this role and be the voice for the people that want to tell these guys enough is enough. Thousands of Canadians are going further and further into debt, losing their businesses, having their hopes and dreams crushed, and having their mental health compromised because of these authoritarian measures. We have known since day one who the most vulnerable people to this virus are, and there is a way we can protect them and have our lives back too. I believe that this is our best chance and maybe our last to end this tyranny and bring some sensibility and unity back to Canada. So please vote for the PPC.
Thank you. Finally, Kevin Hua, representing the NDP. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Hua, and I'm your NDP candidate in this unnecessary election. Many of you probably remember me from the 2019 election when I also served as the NDP candidate. Ever since those 2 years ago when we last met, the world has gone through a lot. We've gone through a lot of hardship, struggle, and challenges. People are upset, angry, frustrated, distressed, and it's to be expected. I come before you today to offer an idea that is a politics of compassion, that we do what is necessary to help each other, and that our policymaking is devised by empathy and humanity. What we need now is to reach net zero economy by 2030. We need to implement pharmacare so that Canadians can access the prescription medication they need. We need to fix our long-term care home system, our housing crisis, and bring justice for all. From this pandemic, we have learned a lot, particularly in collaboration, cooperation, and I hope that's a lesson we can adopt continuously forward.
All right, thank you. I'll just mention for our viewers that there is a Green Party candidate in the riding of Carleton as well, Nira Dukaran, who was not able to join us tonight. All right, let's get into our debate. And I'm going to direct a question to Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative candidate. You'll have 45 seconds to respond on your own, and then we'll open it up for a discussion from all the candidates. Aaron O'Toole ran for the Conservative leadership with a platform and an approach that was described by many as socially conservative. He described himself as true blue. Now he's proposing policies that are clearly more centrist in this federal election campaign. So the question is, who is the real Aaron O'Toole?
Well, he's a veteran, a former business lawyer, a member of Parliament from Durham, and a champion of working-class people. In this election, I believe he and the Conservatives are the only ones presenting a plan to get paychecks for Canadians. Not just paychecks, but paychecks protected against the rising cost of living. While the socialist parties propose to continue printing and borrowing money to cause mass inflation at the great detriment of the working poor and to the great advantage of the super rich, only Conservatives will protect the value of the dollar by bringing our spending back in line with our needs and our abilities to pay. So in other words, Aaron O'Toole is the candidate for Prime Minister who will take us from more debt to more paychecks.
It's open to everyone now. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. O'Toole is just yet another Conservative. He's like his colleague Pierre. What he wants to do is cut services and reduce our ability to move forward. He doesn't want a childcare program. He wants to rip up the agreements that we have across Canada right now. We have with 8 provinces to provide affordable childcare. So essentially, he wants to make your life more expensive.
I just want to point out, how can we trust Aaron O'Toole when he makes a pledge one day to not do any carbon tax and then goes ahead and changes his mind right after that? It seems a little bit two-faced, I have to say.
You know, I actually kind of find it quite laughable that Mr. Poilievre says that Mr. O'Toole is a champion of the working class. He very much isn't. He likes to cite his background when he was in Durham, that his father used to work with the working class. Unfortunately, his father was part of the management that generally exploited and oppressed the working class. So, it's funny that this is the sort of angle they've been going for. We could see that in the policies Mr. O'Toole has been pushing as well, claiming that they help the working class, but they very much don't. Both unions and economists have been saying they do not help the working class. If I may also add, actually, and I find it interesting that Mr. Poilievre has finally accused me of being a socialist instead of doing so simply canvassing. I think, Mr. Poilievre, you need to understand when it comes to the inflation rate, what we're seeing right now is actually entirely expected. So what we're seeing with the inflation rate is about...
That's true.
Sorry? Yes.
That's true.
So
I agree.
Well, I think we agree on different things, though. That's the thing. So the inflation rate is about 3 to 4 percentage points right now. And that's actually entirely expected because, one, we're coming out of a pandemic after we've entered an economic crisis when economic activity was depressed. At this point, economic activity is starting to kick up again. And as a result, it's pushing up on the inflation rate. It's trying to catch up from previously before. I mean, we had deflation during the pandemic as well. So it should be expected that our inflation rate would increase.
Well, you're factually wrong. The economy is not picking up. In fact, if you check the data from this week, the economy contracted in the most recent quarter. In fact, it was the only economy in the G7 to contract. And so we're simultaneously having a contracting economy while we have rising consumer prices. Simultaneously, we have labor shortages while we have the second highest unemployment in the G7. We're getting the worst of all worlds. Higher prices with lower paychecks, and Mr. Hua is right, it is totally predictable that when you print $300 billion worth of cash, you have more money chasing fewer goods and services, which everywhere and always drives up inflation. And that to the detriment of the poor. It's amazing that the NDP, which claims to represent the less fortunate, is in favor of inflation, which makes millionaire mansion owners much wealthier, while making working class renters and the working poor much worse off. And with regards to Mr. Hua and his proposal on childcare, he's not proposing to make it more affordable. He's proposing to take parents' money, give it to the federal government, which gives it to the provincial government, which gives it to the municipal government, which gives it to a child care agency, which assigns those parents a daycare space whether they want it or not. And somehow going through all that bureaucracy is going to make it more affordable. We'll put the dollars right in the pockets of the parents because we have millions of child care experts in Canada. Their names are Mom and Dad.
Well, it's quite interesting to say that, Monsieur Poilievre, but I mean, it was just recently came out where they found that the Conservative plan for childcare would actually leave Canadian families worse off. It's the NDP and Liberal plans that would provide more. Furthermore, going back to the issue, I mean, you went through a lot and there was a lot of diversion there, but if we start with the issue of inflation again, I was going to bring up a second point, is that what we've seen with the inflation rate is that it's largely been sectoral. It's been areas such as lumber, used cars, etc., and those have been found to be issues of production and supply. Either the supply chain isn't capable of producing enough to meet the demand, or production has slowed down because of the pandemic and needs time to catch up. So, you know, I find it quite laughable that because this is basic economics, Monsieur Poilievre. You know, when it comes to the labor...
The question is about Mr. O'Toole and his leadership. And I think we can all agree that Mr. O'Toole does not have leadership. He can't even get his MPs and his candidates to be vaccinated.
Neither can you.
He's got different.
Are all your candidates vaccinated?
Opinions on
Are
pretty
all
much
Liberal
everything.
candidates vaccinated?
So yes, they are.
No,
actually.
they're not.
Yeah.
It should be a personal choice, really.
So ultimately,
No, they're not.
if we're talking about Mr. O'Toole right now, we can talk about the economy at some point. But Mr. O'Toole, as a prime minister, is a non-start.
I
We
can
all know
understand
that.
why Mr.
Poilievre
Roy
knows that.
does not want to talk
And what
about
we
the
need
economy.
to do is move forward. We need better policies. We need
It makes sense you don't want
We
to talk
need
about the economy
childcare, we need
because
affordable
you've
housing,
delivered the worst
Okay,
economy
one at a
in
time,
the
please.
to
G7.
make sure that, that there's opportunity for everyone. We need to protect our environment. And these are all things that Mr. O'Toole does not have a plan for.
Well, I'm
He
gonna
just
try
doesn't
and-
have a plan.
I'm just going to
The
interject
biggest reason we're
one
having
more
inflation
time.
is because of spending billions on COVID measures and restrictions, which Mr. Poilievre, your party supported that. So on one hand, you're complaining about inflation.
You're
yet
wrong.
You supported
You're
that.
factually wrong. You're
I do want-
factually wrong.
I do want to
I've
touch
seen-
You should do your
upon
research.
I follow you on social
The
You
media.
issue
should
of
actually
the labor
you should do
shortage
your
that Mr.
research,
Poilievre has
actually, sir.
claimed.
He's accused me of supporting
go
the
ahead.
most recent COVID spending measures,
I'd
and I
just
have
like to-
not.
No, sorry, Kevin, just hold
And-
on.
and
one
I have
second.
not.
believe it says right on your
spending
platform.
measures
If I could.
were
Okay,
justified.
again, excuse me, one at a
We had
time, please,
COVID.
because nobody can hear what you're saying if you're all talking at the same time. Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah,
and
we,
then-
we supported giving people an income replacement when they weren't able to go to work in the very early days of COVID. We did not support, as the PPC candidate just incorrectly suggested, the most recent spending because we believe that it was irresponsible and unrelated to the COVID crisis, and it has led to the inflationary spiral that is hitting Canadians and that none of the other parties
Okay.
seem to care about.
I'm just going to give a little bit of time, maybe 15 seconds each to you, and then Kevin Waugh will go to you.
I'm just going to say it says right on the Conservative Party's website that they supported spending the money on the COVID measures. It's
Okay.
right on the website.
Yeah, I
Kevin
just
Waugh,
want
very
to-
quickly.
Yes, I just want to quickly address the labor shortage that Mr. Poilievre claims. He likes the free enterprise, but when the free enterprise, I mean, this is what it comes to. When people don't want the wages that are being offered, that's what's happened. People don't want to take the job. So,
Okay.
Mr. Poilievre, maybe you should be the one going back to school in September and not me.
Pierre Poilievre, you get the last 30 seconds on this because I asked you the question, so go ahead.
Well, it looks like I'm the only one concerned about inflation up here. I raise it, the Liberal candidate didn't even mention it. The NDP candidate said it doesn't matter at all. I can understand the NDP being out of touch with working class Canadians. But if you talk to single mothers, to working class parents, to hockey dads and soccer moms, they will tell you that inflation is real, that it is hitting them hard, and that we need to stop destroying our dollar and protect the paychecks of Canadians now. Only Conservatives have a plan to do that.
All right, thank you. Let's move to the next question, which I'll direct to the Liberal candidate, Gustave Roy.
Thank you.
As recently as a few months ago, your leader, Justin Trudeau, was opposed to mandatory vaccines, saying that they would be divisive and disruptive to communities and to the country. Isn't it a bit rich for him now to accuse anyone who's opposed to mandatory vaccines as a threat to the safety of children? And do you believe in mandatory vaccines, or is this just a wedge issue that can be used to divide voters during this campaign?
Not at all, and I don't think Mr. Trudeau ever opposed vaccination. So mandatory vaccines are the only way that we can get through this pandemic. It's proven by science, and this is what Canadians need to be doing. If we want to get on with our recovery, if we want to see a post-COVID recovery and reinvest in our society and see our economy grow, and the jobs fully come back and the inflation addressed, we need to be vaccinated. That's the only path forward. So I don't think Mr. Trudeau is on the wrong path, quite the opposite. I think he's on the right path, and I fully support vaccination. We need to protect our children, and that's how we're going to do it.
So you say
Okay.
that the
It's open to everyone now.
you say that the vaccines are proven. It's brand new technology. It's never been used on humans before. It's only been out for a few months, and you're that confident that,
That
we
is
can go and inject it into the whole world.
completely incorrect. So you need to
mRNA technology.
you need to
never been used on
understand the
humans
science.
before.
The mRNA technology has been around for several years. I have a
Being used
background
on
in
humans.
the pharma industry, and I know very well that this has been technology that was developed even in SARS-1.
Has it been
So-
used on humans?
It has been used, yes, absolutely.
Mr. Crawley, I understand that you're concerned about the vaccine and sort of the advancements that we've made, but I'm going to be honest, I'm going to trust scientists over you on this. And
There's lots of scientists. You can't cherry pick the data. and
I'm not cherry
cherry-pick which
picking the data.
scientists you listen
It's
to.
been decided universal or not.
Scientists. That's not how science works.
I'm going to jump in to steer the discussion back towards the issue not of vaccines, but mandatory vaccines, which is an issue in this campaign. So
It's
can
a
we?
violation of our rights and freedoms.
Under what section? Under what section of the charter is a violation of our freedoms?
Section 1, that
It's-
there's no restriction, no
Do you-
restrictions.
hold on. You say section 1. Do you know what section 1 of the charter is?
Yeah, I do.
please
It
tell
says
us.
that you cannot put limits on our rights and freedoms unless it's been proven reasonable and justifiable.
No,
in a
I'm
free
sorry.
democratic
That's
society.
not what Section 1 says. Section 1 is the
Yes,
Reasonable
it
Limits
is.
Clause, which allows for the federal
what I just
government to
quoted.
essentially infringe on the charter if there are reasons to do so under the Oakes test. So, I mean, I do have a minor in law, so I do know this, and
That's what I just said. And
no,
you
it's not
can't
what you
call-
just said.
you
I'm
can't
sorry,
call it
Mr.
reasonable.
Crawley.
It is.
Mandatory vaccines is common sense. You want to travel safely, you want to shop safely, you want to get out and about safely, you need to be confident that the people around you are vaccinated. There are people in this population in our world that cannot get a vaccine. We have children under the age of 12, and we also have some people, a very small minority, that cannot receive a vaccine.
I've found
So
government
there are
documents.
people in our society that are at a disadvantage, and it is our responsibility collectively to do what's right. And like our Prime Minister, I have no patience for those who do not want a vaccine.
I found government documents where they admit that it does not prevent transmission. So when you're accusing us of
there's
putting
so
other
much-
people at
You
risk,
found
it's just not
government
true.
There's so
documents.
much conspiracy theory. I
Yes, I
mean,
can
you
show
go on the internet, and if you're getting your information on
Government
Facebook
document.
and
It
Twitter,
says they-
I'm not surprised that you're concerned about vaccines. There are millions of people that have received vaccines, and they have been proven to be safe and effective, and it is the right thing to do.
Antibody-dependent enhancement can take 3 months to 3 years to show up. It hasn't been around that long to see if that's going to be the case. It's a brand new vaccine.
The
You can't be
vaccines
so sure of it
the
by now.
vaccines were conducted through multi-centered randomized clinical trials. There were tens of thousands of people that received the vaccines, and they have been proven to be safe and effective. So if you don't want to end up in the hospital and you don't want to die of COVID, you need to be
There are
vaccinated.
thousands of adverse reactions to this. that
It's
are being
important to remember
underreported.
that vaccines are perhaps one of the greatest advancements in medical science in our history. It's saved millions of lives all across the world.
It's a straw man
and it's
argument. We're not
always
arguing all
interesting
vaccines.
that
Okay,
it's
one at a time, please.
It's among the most privileged populations. It's always in the Western nations where vaccine hesitancy is the highest. Perhaps because we're so privileged to have such access to medical treatments such as vaccines. So, I mean, I completely agree with Mr. Roy. mandating vaccines can be important, particularly in important sectors like transport, healthcare, education. And, personally, unless we can't hit the herd immunity rate which we need, which I believe is now 85% for the COVID vaccine, if we can't hit that 85% threshold, then I would absolutely support making vaccines mandatory across the country.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Okay.
a nice straw man argument, Kevin, about
I'm going to
vaccines
jump
and
in, Pierre
history.
Poilievre. We haven't heard from you yet on this. It's your choice whether you want to join the discussion or not. But
Yeah, we agree with the position that the Treasury Board published, I think about 3 weeks ago, which is that people can either be vaccinated or tested daily when they go into work. That has been the position of the government until suddenly Trudeau called an unnecessary and sudden election. He changed his mind and flip-flopped, and he tried to use it as a political wedge issue. Of course, even if he believed in mandatory vaccines, he can't enforce it because he's not running the government right now. He's running for his job. And Mr. Roy stated, we got to be careful about misinformation in these times. Mr. Roy stated that all Liberal candidates have been vaccinated. In fact, the Prime Minister admitted in a question when he was asked by the National Post if they were in fact vaccinated. He said, no, not all candidates have been vaccinated. So I would encourage Mr. Roy to stop spreading misinformation about his party and their candidates and stop using this as a political issue. Liberals have used COVID as a political opportunity, in their own words, by the way, since the very beginning. They used it to attempt to take power, to raise taxes, any tax they wanted for 2 years. They used it to attack their political opponents. They've used it to call this unnecessary election, and that is why the Canadian people are rejecting the Liberal Party right now.
It's about,
okay.
It's about,
Gustave Roy, I asked you the question, so you get the last 30 seconds now
Thank
on
you.
it. Go ahead.
So vaccines are about common sense. I think we all want to get back to life as normal, and I appreciate that and I understand that. There hasn't been any flip-flopping. We've gone out, we've got what we needed to secure the population, make sure that there's enough vaccines for everyone. We've made a lot of efforts. We've shut down our economy. We've stayed at home. We've made a lot of sacrifices. And now's the time to reopen. And we all knew that this was the way that it was going to happen. So the vaccines are available. There's no
Okay.
shortage of them.
That's time. Thank you. Let's move to our next question, which I'll direct to Peter Crawley from the People's Party of Canada. Sticking with the theme of the pandemic, what specific measures would you undertake to help local businesses and Canadians emerging from the pandemic? What is your post-pandemic recovery plan?
Well, we want to abolish all these restrictions. COVID passports, I think, as I mentioned earlier, is infringement on our rights. And I think there's a way that we can protect the vulnerable people that we've known pretty early on in this pandemic by putting our focus on them, our resources towards them, perhaps N95 masks, or there's lots of research that shows there's lots of ways we could focus our efforts on them and let the people that are basically have at no risk to the virus go back to work and resume getting our economy going and going to their jobs and living on with their lives. There's no reason we can't do that, and they won't even entertain the idea of it. Nobody else here is even willing to talk about that. They just want to go with the same narrative that
Okay, it's
vaccines
open to
are the
everyone
only
now.
way.
So, Mr. Crawley, you said Section 1. Can you explain exactly how the government is violating Section 1 with vaccines?
Because you have a right to choose your medical treatments.
Section 1 says nothing about medical treatments or choosing it.
Talks about
Again, Section 1,
limitations.
and let's just make it clear
Okay,
what
I just want to steer this back. We just talked about vaccines. This is about the post-pandemic economic recovery for residents of Carleton and business owners.
So
let's.
the post-COVID recovery is going to be achieved through investing in people and investing in our businesses. So that's how we're going to move forward. We're going to grow the economy, and that's going to create good paying jobs, and we're going to support young families so that they can access homes, they can care for their children, and go back to work. And that's going to be the future. We've got a bright future ahead of us. We need to get to work. And my colleague from the NDP is not completely wrong. We need to get through the pandemic, and that means we need to get vaccinated. But ultimately, the future is very bright. We have an enormous amount of programs that are available. We're going to extend the Canada Recovery Hiring Program until the end of March to make sure that certain sectors that are still struggling to recover from the pandemic are well supported. and that we can continue growing our economy. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do in Carleton, and that's what we need to do across Canada.
Yeah, I think it's important to know with this pandemic, actually, we've come to the realization that we need to have well-funded, robust welfare systems, healthcare systems, social systems. I mean, we could see that with the long-term care homes that we have. The for-profit long-term care homes, which have had the highest rates of infection, the highest rates of deaths, losing our loved ones as a result. So we need to remove for-profit care systems out of the system. And we need also implement pharmacare, because it's become so clear and vital that Canadians need access, universal access, easy access to their prescription medications. I mean, the Liberals unfortunately voted against the motion for prescription medications. And Mr. Roy, you mentioned that you had a background in so-called health sciences. That was with the pharmaceutical company Novartis, which, let's just say, has a not so clean history in terms of corruption, bribery, as well as fighting patents in India and overall exploiting and extracting profit from sickness.
Okay, what is your question? Novartis has a fantastic reputation. It's one of the leaders in health sciences throughout the world, but I don't think we're here to talk about Novartis.
That's quite funny, because when I
we're
searched
here to talk
Novartis,
about-
I found
about
plenty
what
of
we can
pages
do
that talked
for
about
citizens
its
of Carleton.
controversies.
And if we want to talk about the pharmaceutical industry, perhaps we could do that at some other time, but I'm very proud to have worked for such an important company that's done a lot of good, and I think we need to move forward. Really.
If we're going to get our economy going again, we need to let people go back to work. And Mr. Trudeau and the other governments keep moving the goalposts. It started with 2 weeks to flatten the curve to now everybody has to get vaccinated. And it just keeps moving and moving. And honestly,
it's common
enough is
sense.
enough here.
I have trouble understanding why there's resistance. I mean, everybody's on the same page. Everyone wants to be healthy. We have a proven way to do it. And
It's not
we
proven.
all want to get back to
Denmark
work.
just
We all want
abolished
to get
all
back
COVID
to life as
restrictions.
normal. There's a minority of the population that are
There's studies from
being
Israel
very
showing
aggressive
lots of
about vaccines.
adverse
and
reactions.
they're being
I'm
rounded
going to
up
jump in
by,
again because we've covered vaccines,
Yep.
and this question was meant to be
Yep.
about
Yep.
the post-pandemic economic recovery and
Well,
how.
post-pandemic, we
the
have to end the
post-pandemic-
pandemic first. We have to get past this, and it's not ending. That's what I was saying about moving the goalpost. It just keeps going on and on and on.
So the post-pandemic economic recovery, I believe, should be called the post-COVID era. We are entering a new era where the world will be investing in climate change. We'll be spending large sums of money, not just in Canada, but across the planet. And that's what we need to keep our eye on. We need to finish, obviously, the pandemic, and I think we're well on our way. Once we're back to normal, we need to start investing. We invest in our people, we invest in our economy, and we make sure that we're moving forward in a new sector. And that's where the new jobs are going to come.
Pierre
That's where
Poilievre.
we're going to grow their economy.
Mark, we need to get
and that's how we're going to protect our environment.
people back to work, our spending back to normal, and our businesses making stuff here in Canada again. Borrowing from the world to buy from China is not going to secure our future. Only unleashing free enterprise so our businesses can hire more and pay more to their workers will do that. We need to have faster building permits for projects approved by all three levels of government, full free trade between our provinces so that our consumers and our entrepreneurs can trade freely with one another. We need to build pipelines to get world prices for our oil and stop the importation of dirty foreign oil that causes climate change. And finally, we need to produce the rare earth minerals that are necessary for the green economy right here in Canada. We have them under our feet. If only we could get mines approved, we could create those jobs and those
Peter
paychecks.
Crawley, I asked you the question originally. We'll go back to you. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. So I keep hearing that this vaccine is proven and is beyond a shadow of doubt. Every scientist agrees. That's not how science works. There's no consensus. It's if somebody can challenge the theory, they can be challenged. And there's lots of scientists, some of the most prominent in the world, that are challenging this. There's a study at a UK, a briefing that came out the other day that showed the death rate for vaccinated people under the age of 50 was actually slightly higher than for unvaccinated people. So how does that prove that it's effective?
Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you. I'll direct the next question to Kevin Hua, the NDP candidate. Your party is promising, if it forms a government, to spend in areas like affordable housing and healthcare and other areas as well, billions and billions of dollars. How can we afford to do that given the deficits that we've been running? Is the plan just to add to our debt, or is there some way of reducing spending in other areas and balancing the books eventually? What is your plan?
Well, there's the classic how do you pay for it question, and I'll happily answer it. I mean, there's a couple of things we need to look at, right? The first thing is our system of taxation is completely broken. We have $51 billion that have been lost to tax evasion and tax avoidance, largely because the CRA has been underfunded to be able to fight against corporate lawyers and ultra-rich lawyers who are ensuring that that money doesn't go into your pockets in terms of social spending or investing in you. And there's also the issues of we need to put in a wealth tax. We need to put in an excess profit tax that companies and the ultra-rich who benefited from the pandemic, who made money while you were struggling. So, there are multiple ways that we can do this, and there's multiple new revenue sources, and just fixing the system that we have, that we can find the money that needs to fund for our systems.
Okay, it's open to everyone now on government finances
So the NDP have it partially right. I think they forget that we need to invest strategically. So government programs can be afforded and paid for if we have the economic growth that comes along with investing in our future. The Liberal government is all about doing the right investments, investing strategically. If we look at affordable daycare, the Quebec model has shown us that it has increased the GDP by 1.7%. So there's no reason to believe that that won't be the case throughout Canada. My colleague here doesn't think that. The Conservatives want to rip up all the agreements that have already been set for affordable childcare. That's not going to help our economy grow. So there's just one perfect example of how we need to continue investing, grow the economy, and that will help us afford the social safety net that we want and that the NDP are looking to achieve.
You have no affordable child care plan. What you have is the recycling of your promise that from 30 years ago to once again create a government-run program, a government takeover of child care. In Quebec, this has left 50,000 kids on the waiting list. Their parents have to pay taxes for a child care program they don't get. The other families who don't want government daycare also have to pay twice, once for the child care they choose and a second time for the one the state imposes. The reason it hasn't delivered anything in Canada since the Liberals started promising it 10 elections ago is that the money just gets gobbled up by 3 levels of bureaucracy. We'll cut out all the bureaucracy and give you the money directly. We believe that parents can be trusted. Unlike Liberals who say parents will blow the money on beer and popcorn, we'll put dollars right in the pockets of parents so they can choose their own child care solution. As for taxing to raise money, the Liberals and NDP always claim before the election that it's the rich that will pay, but whether it was in Premier Dexter's government out east, or Bob Rae's government in Ontario, or the Liberal government, we know the rich are not paying more. They end up paying less under these left-wing governments, and the working class people pick up the tab for the explosive increases in the cost of government. After Trudeau took office, the richest 1% paid $4.6 billion less in income tax, according to CRA, which means that the burden, of course, will fall on the workers and the middle-class small business people whom they've targeted in the past. Instead of trying to raise taxes, what we need to do is unleash the free enterprise system to generate more economic growth in order to fund the programs we need. Don't paychecks put roof overhead and food on table, but also tax dollars into roads, hospitals, and schools. And that's why we're going to unleash a job surge with a temporary 50% bonus for new hires by small businesses and an investment tax credit, not only for small businesses, but for high-tech, pre-commercial technology, in order to unleash the investment that will generate the paychecks to fund our cherished social programs and phase out our deficit over the next decade.
Last time I checked,
Mr. Poilievre is sadly mistaken. I don't really think he really understands what he's talking about. This seems to be a reoccurring theme. The daycare program is one of the best ideas that we can implement. We were going to implement it, but Mr. Harper...
You're going to.
Mr. Harper removed it.
You were in
And
power for 13
cut up.
years.
So,
You were in power for 13 years.
Ultimately, coming from someone who has a family,
13
maybe he
years.
can afford a private daycare, but ultimately most Canadians young families need relief. And at $10,000 a year for childcare, that's completely unaffordable. A tax credit is not going to help put money in parents' pockets so that they can take care of their children.
Well, you
What we've
flip-flop.
seen
What
is
we've
that-
seen
is
is a
that- is
flip-flop
that
from
parents-
Mr. Roy, because
parents
Mr. Roy, your
most
party has
often
said
when-
not
Okay,
so
one
long
at a
ago.
time,
are
please.
forced-
One at
I'm
a
sorry,
time,
can I
Yep,
finish?
you finish up in a few seconds.
Most often women are forced to stay home. I've spoken to countless mothers that have told me that they've given up their career to stay home and take care of their children. Having affordable childcare means that they can go back to work, be a contributing force in the workforce. The family can benefit from a dual
let Pierre
income,
Poilievre
and that
respond. Go
creates
ahead, please.
prosperity.
Thank you. Let's let Pierre Poilievre
Well,
respond.
once again, with that liberal elitism, he's just suggested that stay-at-home parents don't contribute anything. I believe parents should have the choice on what they want to do, not have liberals impose it on them. He's also flip-flopped. He's now saying giving money to parents doesn't work. Well, liberals have been promising that and pretending to support giving money to parents since the 2015 election. I think we can take from Mr. Roy's view that he would and his party would take away the child care benefit if he suddenly doesn't believe that parents should get the money directly. And by the way, he's not promising you more affordable daycare. He's promising to put more of your daycare bill on your taxes, because we still have to pay for the facilities, the personnel, and with their system, countless bureaucracy,
Sorry, one at a time,
countless bureaucracy that they would also make you pay for. So childcare would be more expensive under the Liberal plan. We'll put real dollars in your pocket and let you decide.
They will
Okay,
put
very quickly,
less
10 seconds.
They will put less dollars in your pocket. You will have to pay more.
More dollars in your pocket.
You will not have what you need.
Okay, we'll stop there. Kevin Hua, I asked you the question. You get the final 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, last time I checked, most Canadians don't have $10 million in wealth. Most Canadians don't have hundreds of accountants helping them dodge and evade their taxes or put them in tax havens. So I'm pretty sure most Canadians won't be affected by these tax increases that we believe would make the tax system fair. And it's important that we do spend the money, invest the money that we need. If it's important and it benefits Canadians, we should do it. If we don't, we will face the costs from other consequences, including, well, if we don't invest in climate change, we're going to feel the effects of the climate crisis, or we've already felt the effects of the long-term care home system.
Thank you.
Because we didn't
That's
invest in it.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question, which I'll direct to Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative candidate. You were opposed to a carbon tax when it wasn't part of your party's platform. Now your party is proposing to put a price on carbon. Have you changed your mind on this issue?
No, I've not. What Mr. O'Toole is proposing is that instead of paying a tax to the government, industries would pay indirectly into their own green fund. So the difference is this. The other parties would use climate change to collect taxes. We would we would address the issue by redirecting dollars into the greenification of our businesses. So if you have a steel mill that is emitting greenhouse gases, they would pay into their own green fund and use that money to clean up their operations, use alternative and cleaner fuel sources, and create jobs at the same time. That keeps the jobs, the money, and the environmental benefit in our Canadian companies, rather than what's happening now, which is to drive business and jobs and pollution to other countries.
Again, I think Mr. Poilievre does not understand how a carbon tax or levy works. Ultimately, we need to incentivize large emitters to clean up their act. And by having an approach which puts a price on pollution, it's recognized throughout the world that this is the right way to address greenhouse emissions. So again, the money is going back to Canadians. 90% of the money that has been raised through the carbon levy is redistributed to Canadians, and they have an opportunity to pollute less and use more efficient vehicles, for example, and pocket the difference. More money in their pockets. That's something that Mr. Poilievre doesn't seem to understand.
Well, this will help you understand. Go over to Suntech Tomatoes, which is the Little Miracles of Manotick, south of the village itself. And the Liberal carbon tax applies to the CO2 that the farm releases into the greenhouse, even though that CO2 is actually absorbed by the plant life. I think we learned that in middle school. And so it's not actually going into the atmosphere, but they're paying tax on it. So what's the result? It means that it's cheaper to buy a Mexican tomato in Manotick than a Manotick tomato in Manotick. Why? Because the Mexicans don't apply the same carbon tax to their tomato growers. And then that tomato has to travel all the way across North America, emitting greenhouse gases the whole way there, so that we then buy a foreign product that's higher pollution because of the misincentives that this Trudeau Liberal government has imposed, hurting our farmers and hurting our small businesses. We will let farmers, small businesses keep their money to green their operations and power our green future into the years to come.
Again, Mr. Poilievre, you misunderstand how things work. Great.
Enlighten
We're
me.
growing tomatoes in Carleton. That's fantastic. And we've got local produce. Unfortunately, we can't
Why are you taxing
produce
it then?
tomatoes for the entire country.
Why aren't you taxing
So we're not really
Why are you taxing
talking
them?
about tomatoes. We're talking about
taxes on
large
tomatoes.
Okay,
greenhouse
no interrupting,
emitters.
please.
May I-
So we've got steel mills, we have the production of oil sands, we have a large industrial economy that produces enormous amounts of greenhouse gases. What we need to do is reduce those greenhouse gases, not one tomato at a time, but with large programs. The carbon levy gives an incentive for large emitters to invest in technology to reduce their greenhouse emissions. This is what we need to do. It's been proven throughout the world that that is the best solution to address climate change, and that's what we're doing.
Carbon
So is that
taxes
why
aren't-
you bought a pipeline?
I'm sorry?
So is that why you bought a pipeline? To reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Is that why we're still spending $18 billion subsidizing the oil and gas industry?
That's why we reduced one pipeline. One pipeline was canceled. We still...
Oh, so it's okay
we're-
because you canceled the pipeline. You can buy another
Well,
one.
listen, we have to work progressively to reach our goals. I think nobody believes that we're going
One at
to,
a time, please.
achieve our targets tomorrow morning. We have a path to get there, and the Liberal government has been on track. Actually, they've actually surpassed the targets at the time we're speaking today. And that's why we actually increased our targets and our goals because we're doing very well, and the measures that we've implemented are working.
Actually,
so it's
they're
not
not
the
working.
time to go back to Stephen Harper era targets. We need to look forward. We know this is important. We can see it throughout the planet. Canada has had many examples of climate change, and now's the time to act.
Okay,
And the
let's
parties
let some other
around don't
people
seem
get
to
into this.
understand that.
Carbon taxes aren't effective at reducing the amount of carbon. It just puts a strain on our economy, makes stuff more expensive for the end user, like Mr. Poilievre pointed out, or it ships jobs over to China where they just continue to pollute anyways. Carbon taxes are useless. It just hurts us, and it's pointless. And can anyone here tell me what the temperature of the planet is supposed to be, by the way? I guess it's warmed up 1 degree or something, they say, over the last 100 years. What's it supposed to be? Was it supposed to warm up half a degree, or was it supposed to cool, or is it supposed to stay the same forever?
This is the misinformation that we need to avoid.
What's
we all
the
need to work
misinformation?
together to reach a more prosperous economy, and that's going to happen through our fight against climate change. I'm 47 years old. We've been talking
It's an
about the
excuse to
climate
make
since I
taxes.
was a child.
Okay.
There are lots of solutions,
I
lots
want to
of great
make sure
things
there's
that we
time
can
for
do,
Kevin Hua
and we are
to
going
share
to be
some thoughts on that.
implementing them.
On this.
Mr.
Go
Roy, I
ahead.
actually don't appreciate that you telling me that I need to listen to you because it's my future that's on the line with how we deal with climate change. You need to be listening to the youth who are marching, who are continuously telling you can't buy a pipeline and still be a climate leader. And I mean, I'll have to say this too, because Mr. Poilievre isn't exactly better, because during a high school debate during the last election, he actually told an auditorium full of students that their futures were a frustrating obstacle to his pipeline. So I think it's pretty clear
Sorry,
which party
can I
has
respond to
actual
that?
leadership on
All right,
climate
it's
change
time.
here.
Pierre Poilievre, I asked you the question. You get the final 30 seconds.
It's not my pipeline, it's former NDP Premier Rachel Notley's pipeline, because she not only supported it, but subsidized it. So the NDP has to make up its mind. You can't just say one thing in one part of the country and something completely different in another. I'm clear wherever I am. I understand that we have a low-carbon future, but I also believe that as long as we're using oil, it should be Canadian oil. Mr. Waugh and Mr. Roy might prefer dirty Saudi Arabian, Venezuelan, Algerian oil. I believe that as long as we are using petroleum, it should be our clean, green, Canadian petroleum, which is leading the world in all measures of environment, social, and governance.
All right, let's turn to our final question now, which I'll direct to Gustave Roy, the Liberal candidate. Your leader asked for this election despite the fact that there was a looming crisis in Afghanistan and the fourth wave of the pandemic. Why was this election necessary? What specifically are you proposing in this election campaign that couldn't have been done without the election?
Well, we're having an election right now because it is important to check in with Canadians and ensure that they want to continue in the right direction. We've got important decisions to make. We've got important programs that we are ready to deliver to Canadians, and we need the mandate from Canadians to move forward. We've got childcare, we've got affordability of homes, we've got a green plan, we've got programs for seniors, and we have just gone through a very difficult period. Hopefully, this is the end of the pandemic, or we're nearing the end of the pandemic, but we've got to get to work. And the Parliament, as it was functioning prior to the election, was not going to lead us in the right direction.
Okay, it's open to everyone now.
Seems to me he's just calling an election because maybe he sees that everything's going to go down the tubes pretty soon, and he wants to get himself back in before it does. That's the way it seems to me.
I'd say
That's probably true. I mean, Mr. Roy stumbled and bumbled about why there's an election. He, like his leader, has no idea why they've called an election other than they thought they would take advantage of fear in order to secure a majority. It is backfiring on them. But I think he also, the Liberals understand that we're headed towards a debt crisis. We've got $4 of debt for every $1 of GDP. Our households, governments, and businesses have more debt than we have output in our economy, separately, that is. We have the highest household debt in the G7 compared to incomes. And we are, as soon as interest rates rise, that all is going to come crashing down. Trudeau created this mess, and he wants to have the election out of the way before people pay for it and punish him at the ballot box. But I don't think Canadians are being fooled. They understand that we need quickly to transition from a credit card economy to a paycheck economy, that we can generate the incomes not only to service our debts, but to keep food on table, roof overhead, and build the roads, hospitals, and schools our people need. And only the Conservative Party has the plan to secure the future.
Quite the opposite, and I respectfully disagree, Mr. Poilievre. The Conservatives do not have a plan. They don't know how much they're going to spend. They don't know exactly how they're going to achieve it. If I listen to you and your lack of understanding of economic principles, I think we're in big trouble. If you want to fight inflation,
I know that the budget doesn't balance itself. That's one principle I do understand.
Didn't Mr. Aaron O'Toole also say that the budget
again, one at a
balances
time,
itself?
please. One
I
at a
also
time.
know, Mr. Poilievre, that we're not going to start raising interest rates to lower inflation and reduce the value of homes, as you're suggesting. So, we need leadership. We've had leadership throughout the pandemic, and now's the perfect time to elect a Liberal government. Let's elect a Liberal in Carleton, and let's start moving forward together with real policies that are actually going to help you. Fear-mongering is happening by Mr. Poilievre. Him telling you that price of oil is dictated in Canada is simply wrong.
Nobody said that.
It happens on international markets. The rising cost of goods is related to supply disruptions. It's related to the pandemic. You don't want to believe a thing he says.
Well, frankly, the reason that people are believing what I say is because it's all coming true. I said that if you printed $300 billion at the outset to fund the biggest deficit in the G20, remember all the other G20 countries had deficits, had COVID too, but they didn't have Justin Trudeau running their finances. I said that that would lead to inflation. And what do you know? We have the highest inflation in 2 decades. We have 30 percentage point increase in housing prices. And that is not a supply issue. That is a combination of demand and supply, because we are printing more money, but we are not building more homes. And yes, if we had a more valuable dollar, we would have more affordable commodities in Canadian dollars, commodities like oil. We have the third biggest supply of oil on earth, and yet we have $1.30 a liter gas. We have the most farmland, the third most farmland per person on earth, and yet we don't have affordable food. We have more lumber, land, and labor than anyone, and yet our young people cannot afford a home. We've got to stop creating cash and start creating the stuff cash buys. Unleash the productive forces of our economy to do it.
If I could go
Mr.
back to
Okay,
Poilievre, that is just-
Kevin, I want to hear
If I
from
could go
Kevin
back
on
to the
this.
original topic, which was whether or not this election was necessary or unnecessary, it's very much unnecessary. There was no reason for the Liberals to call this. They maintained support. The NDP said that they would support the agenda for childcare, for pharmacare, if the Liberals would push forward with it. They did not lose confidence in the House. That was the only mandate they needed, the confidence of the House. And as a result, you had Bill C-6, which would have banned conversion therapy, die on the docket as a result, because the Liberals, I mean, it was ready. The bill was ready prior to when they actually submitted it. It was on the House docket. The issue is they held back so that they could time it with Pride Month, which, I mean, just seems like appearances to me, just wanting to look an ally with the LGBTQ plus community. And as a result, because of their slow movement with it, it's dead. We don't have, conversion therapy is still legal in Canada. That is a fact right now because the Liberals didn't actually pass the bill.
And 65 Conservatives voted for conversion therapy. I'm sorry. Again,
Well, if you wanted it passed, you wouldn't have called the election.
Again, with
If you wanted it passed, you wouldn't have called the election. You didn't want it passed.
We need to move
You're
forward.
not worried about
we
the
need
future
a
of
strong
the
mandate
country.
to
You're
do
worried
so.
about
We
your
have a
political
lot of work to
opportunism.
do. We've got some great programs and some great initiatives that are going to help all Canadians. Now's the time to make those decisions. An election now, in a month, in 3 months, who knows when the election would happen? So we decided to have an election now because it was the right time to do so, because we need to make decisions now.
When BC's on fire, right? Perfect timing.
BC's on fire. Afghanistan is in chaos. Our people are left behind there. Our economy is in ruins. We have a labor shortage, high unemployment, 2-decade highs in inflation, the biggest deficit in the G20. We have the Delta variant circulating, civil strife in our society, and this, while we should all be working together in Parliament to tackle those problems, Justin Trudeau said, nope, let's call an election so that he can secure his precious majority. Canadians
Poilievre,
want us
Okay,
to get
you're going to get
things
the final
done.
30
I
seconds
don't
anyway.
think-
Sorry, just let Pierre Poilievre finish, and you'll get the final 30 seconds
Thank you.
anyway.
Canadians wanted us to secure the future, not play politics, and that is what our Conservative government will do.
Okay. Gustave Roy, you have the final 30 seconds on this topic. Go ahead.
Listen, now is the time to make the decisions that we need to make for our future. You know, Mr. Poilievre is the worst collaborator in the House of Commons, so let's not kid ourselves here. He hasn't brought one solution. He talks about creating more paychecks, but doesn't tell you how he's going to do that. Mr. O'Toole has a platform without any numbers attached to it. The NDP, they just want to spend more money on social programs, and they're forgetting what we need to do to advance in terms of our
Okay, that's
economic
time.
recovery.
Thank you. We're going to move now to the closing statements. So each candidate will have 1 minute to give some final thoughts to you, the voters in Carleton. And we're going to do those in the reverse order of the opening statements. So we'll start with the NDP candidate, Kevin Hua. Go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. So many of you are probably wondering, why should we elect a student to be member of Parliament? And that's a fair question. I believe that the most important traits when it comes to a member of Parliament is not their oratory ability or their legislative prowess, it's their ability to listen and to learn. And those traits overlap the most and the best with a student who understands what it means to listen and to learn and to take in knowledge. An MP is not the sum of the individual themselves. They are the sum of all the riding's constituents together, all their knowledge, their experience, and their wisdom. I want to be your member of parliament in order to lead Carleton in a progressive direction, to invest in Canadians, to bring pharmacare, to finally tackle the housing crisis, the climate crisis, to address the issues we're facing with our long-term care system. We need bold action, and we need actual action, not talk, but action, and that's what I will provide with you with a politics of compassion.
Okay, thank you. Peter Crawley from the People's Party of Canada, you're next. You have 1 minute.
Just want to reiterate that the COVID passport is, in fact, a huge violation to our constitutional rights. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that the only time our rights and freedoms can legally be subject to limitations is if they are demonstrated to be reasonable and justified in a free and democratic society. How can you say that a COVID passport is reasonable and justified when the vaccine doesn't even prevent transmission of the virus, and recent studies are showing that the effectiveness of the vaccine is questionable, not to mention all the adverse reactions that are happening? The vaccines have not completed all their trials, and this is the first time we've ever used mRNA technology on humans, and we don't know what the long-term effects will be. How can you justify forcing someone to take that? Now, I actually really like Mr. Poilievre. I think he's a smart guy and a really great MP, except I haven't even heard a peep out of him about this issue. His party actually supports it. It's too bad he doesn't have the guts to join us, a real Conservative party, because his party is just a different brand of the Liberals now. I hope he realizes that evil prevails when good people do nothing.
Okay, thank you. Next is the Liberal candidate, Gustave. Go ahead, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. The people of Carleton are looking for leadership. They worry about the rising cost of living, climate change, and finishing the fight against COVID. I get that. Pierre doesn't. He's going to make life more expensive by canceling $10 a day childcare and cutting services to save money. While parts of our country are on fire, the Conservatives still don't think we need to take real action against climate change. And worst of all, Pierre thinks that keeping people from going bankrupt during the pandemic was a waste of money. That's why the Liberal plan is the only one that can finish the fight against COVID. We'll build a better Canada that helps everyone move forward. Carleton, it's time to vote for an MP that better represents your values, one that fights to make life more affordable, takes action against climate change, and makes sure we come out on top of this pandemic.
Okay, that's time. Thank you. Pierre Poilievre, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Today we saw the NDP and Liberals say inflation's not a problem, that your cost of living is not going up. I dare them to stand outside of a grocery store and stop single mothers or working-class carpenters who are going in to try to feed their kids. I dare them to say that to the 27-year-old still living in his parents' basement because he can't afford the down payment on even the most modest home. I dare them to say that to the guy gassing up his car so he can go off and run his small business, because none of those people in the real world would accept that line. It's more proof of why Carleton needs a watchdog, not a lapdog, someone to fight for the interests of the people, to transform our economy from a credit card economy to a paycheck economy, unleash the force of free enterprise so our workers can make more, our businesses can do more, and our country can be more. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, candidates, for participating in this debate, and good luck the rest of the way in the campaign. That concludes our debate for the riding of Carleton. Thank you for watching.